Today's video is brought to you by Assiniboia Downs Gaming and Event Center. And be sure to tune in to Trust the Profits Live Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern for Monday Night Lights, hosted by Matthew DeSantis.
Salutations and welcome, friends, to this very special stakes preview here on Trust the Profits. My name is Matthew DeSantis, and you can find me on Twitter at the handle @Failed to Menace. Well, before we get into this year's Monomoy Girls Stakes preview taking place this Saturday at Ellis Park, just want to press that subscribe button here on YouTube to get all of our great content on Trust the Profits. We have so much coming for you. Yes, we're done with the Triple Crown, but that's not going to stop. We have top 5 lists, top 10 lists. More on top of that, we have handicapping each and every week, capping the card, looking at the Haskell preview day taking place at Monmouth. We got Royal Ascot previews coming up for next week. We have a slew of content ready for you, getting ready for Saratoga and the rest of the year. Every week, handicapping, horse racing news, stakes previews, the live betting on Monday and Thursday nights at Assiniboia and Woodbine. So we got a lot of great content here for you on the channel. So press that subscribe button. Additionally, like this video and comment below in the chat with who's your pick in this year's Monomoy Girl Stakes. This is, I think, a really compelling race, a very exciting one. It's a short field, but a very interesting one. So let's dive into this year's Monomoy Girl Stakes. And it is a 6-horse field, and obviously we're going a mile on the dirt for 3-year-old fillies. But it's important to point out that at Ellis Park, the mile is not a traditional one-turn mile. It is what is more commonly referred to as kind of a 1.5-turn mile. There is a chute by where the first and second turn is. The horses will run out of that chute and into the far second turn, and then go down the backstretch and then come around as they would normally. So it's a little bit like the chute that they built up at Saratoga this past year. So if you're not familiar with Ellis Park, like I said, it's not that traditional one-turn mile coming out of the chute, just having that long run down the backstretch. You're making that initial run, and then you're going into the turning into the backstretch and then going normal the rest of the way. So a little bit of a different configuration. Something to point out, some of the early track trends at Ellis Park. This is very intriguing. First of all, coming out of that 1-mile chute, generally speaking, speed has been very effective. Half of the races have been won wire to wire coming out of that. Now, very limited sample size, only 8 cases, but 4 of the winners coming out have been those wire to wire, gate to wire jobs in terms of a horse getting out on the front end and taking them all the way home. The other thing to point out is the further outside the post is, it seems like the more favorable it is in this 1-mile chute. Now, it's a very small field here, a field of 6. So perhaps post position won't play quite as much of an impact, but it is telling that a majority of the winners have been coming from the further outside post. So one could infer from those statistics, early speed on the outside might be particularly effective coming out of this 1-turn chute or 1.5-turn chute at Ellis Park. So something to keep in mind, the way the track's playing. Obviously, one of the things that we also are going to look at is the weather. Weather looks lovely this weekend, so no issues there. And let's talk a little bit more about this field. And I think when I bring up the weather, I bring it up for a particular reason, and that is the horse Wet Paint, who is, of course, your morning line favorite at 6-5. This was your Kentucky Oaks favorite. This was the Brad Cox filly who had come in to that Kentucky Oaks, having won 3 consecutive stakes races at Oaklawn Park. But a lot of the talk was how much this horse liked the slop, had won the Martha Washington on a sealed track, had come back and won the Honeybee on a sloppy sealed track, did win the Fantasy very impressively on a dry fast track, came back and finished 4th by 3 lengths in that Kentucky Oaks. Now, we've seen that Kentucky Oaks come back strong already, as you would imagine. Pretty Mischievous comes back and wins last weekend at the Belmont Day undercard and wins, or Belmont weekend undercard, I should say, and wins the Acorn on Friday. So good to see that race coming back strong already. Gambling Girl is back on the workout tab. So that's something to keep an eye on because she really ran a big race that day. Listen, Wet Paint didn't run a bad race, but when you spot yourself that many lengths against that many quality horses in a larger field, it's a little hard to navigate around. Now Wet Paint has a much smaller field to navigate around, presumably will not be quite as far back, only 6 horses. So even if she's dead last, she still has got that devastating closing kick, and she's not going to have nearly as much traffic to contend with coming through and weaving through the field. She's been training well for Brad Cox. And again, listen, no matter how you want to slice the data, Brad Cox always has really strong numbers in these sorts of graded stakes races. Now, that said, this is an interesting race in this regard, that you have two heavy favorites in Wet Paint and Hoosier Philly. One's a closer, one's a leader, in terms of Hoosier Philly being that horse that's going to flash speed and be out early out of the gate and be leading them early. So the question that you have, and this is from a handicapping perspective, something that a lot of bettors don't like, when you have two strong favorites and they have two different running styles. Because now you have to pose the question, well, is there anybody who's faster on the front end than Hoosier Philly? And is there anybody closing that's better than Wet Paint? And the answer is no to either of those questions. Hoosier Philly is by far and away the fastest horse in this field. She will get out on the front end, and she'll sit whatever trip Tom Amos and Edgar Morales want her to sit. Okay. She'll sit the trip no matter how they want. So if she wants to be on the lead, she'll be on the lead. If she wants to stalk, she'll stalk. But she's got superior speed to everybody else in this field. Wet Paint, nobody's got the closing kick that Wet Paint does in this field. So when you're trying to find alternatives to these two, it's a challenge. First of all, it's a challenge because it's only a 6-horse field, but it's also a challenge because you go, well, you're either going to presumably win on the front end and take them gate to wire, or you're going to look at maybe they go too fast up front and it opens things up to a horse that has that devastating kick like Wet Paint coming to close, and nobody's better coming late than Wet Paint is in the field. So you're kind of caught in this position where it's like, well, which one of the two favorites do I end up going with, essentially? Sometimes it's nicer when you have two favorites who have the same running style. If you have two favorites who are both front runners, you go, well, maybe they wear each other out. And now, logically, I can pick a horse that's a little bit more of a price that's sitting mid-pack or a little further back. Similarly, if you have two horses that are dead closers like Wet Paint and two favorites that are dead closers, you could make the argument, well, somebody can get out on the front end and steal this race from them. When it's one of each, it's a little bit harder to find that alternative to the quote-unquote chalk. And these two are going to get a fair amount of money. I would imagine Wet Paint will go off as the favorite in this race. Hoosier Philly does get a lot of support, no doubt about it. So something certainly to keep an eye on as it gets closer. Now, I mentioned that Hoosier Philly is going to get out to that early lead. And I should say she had a huge bounce back effort in that Black-Eyed Susan. So impressive. I mean, there are so many people who doubted her, myself included, and rightfully so. I didn't think she was good enough to win the Rachel Alexandra. I didn't think she was good enough to win the Fair Crown Oaks. Not only was she not good enough to win those two, she didn't even look competitive in those two races. Tom Amos brings her back. She has a series of just spectacular workouts before that Black-Eyed Susan and runs arguably the best race of her career, even better than the grade 2 goldenrod victory that she had at Churchill as a 2-year-old. She comes back, runs a huge race, losing to Taxed, but beating Faiza, who was the Bob Baffert filly that a lot of us thought was just a huge monster from out in the West Coast, still beat her by over 2 3/4 lengths and recorded her best Beyer speed figure to date. So maybe she's finally turned the corner. Maybe she's finally figured out a way to take those amazing morning workouts and translate them into amazing efforts on the dirt. Because here's the thing, she's still working out gangbusters. Coming out of the Black-Eyed Susan, she's had 3 works, 48-3, 47-3, and just the other day, a 47 flat 4 furlong work at Churchill, which was 2 out of 103. She's feeling good. Clearly, she's got that speed. She can go if she wants to. And again, I think she's going to use what she did in the Black-Eyed Susan, just go out there in the lead and make somebody try to catch her. And the question is whether or not Wet Paint is going to be able to catch her in a smaller field and without a lot of pace pressure. And Hoosier Philly will be able to dictate the pace. So I think she's a formidable challenger to Wet Paint in this regard. Now, if you want to look beyond those two favorites, we can look at the number 2, just go through each horse a little bit here. Flamand. Listen, I know people are going to say this horse might represent early speed because this is a sprint horse that's stretching out. This horse stretched out last time out and sat a mid-pack trip and actually won that race. Now, that was a $75,000 claimer. The 2 times this horse has stepped up against stakes competition have been 2 of its worst performances. So she finished 7th by 10 3/4 lengths and 7th by 11 1/4 lengths in her 2 previous attempts at stakes competition, just listed stakes competition. So now that granted that was sprinting. Maybe you think stretching out is going to be beneficial. She's proven to be a very versatile horse in that she's won going 5.5 furlongs and she came back going a mile and a 16th. Should be noted that last mile and a 16th was on a muddy track. Maybe it was benefited by that a little bit. The speed figures haven't really gotten there to the point of challenging the others. So hard for me to get too excited about this one. The number 3, Never Tell Patty, 15-1 for Eric Reed with Barry Agno on the mount. Just broke her maiden last time out, going a mile at Churchill. Certainly was impressive. First 2 efforts were on synthetic. Seems like she got on the surface that she likes the most. Some of the works leading up to that last race were good. Has not worked since that race, interestingly enough. That was on May 18th. It has not registered an official work since then. Is going off of Lasix for the first time ever. That's something to obviously keep in mind. That's also true. Flamande going off Lasix for this effort. One of her previous stakes races was also off Lasix. Obviously, we talked about how disappointing that was. But again, with Never Tell Patty, this is a horse that's going to be sitting probably third, I would imagine, in this field, probably behind Hoosier Philly, behind Flamande, and will be sitting in that third trip. Listen, maybe you think this horse trips out. Maybe maybe Flamande and Hoosier Philly go too fast. Maybe Wet Paint can't quite get there, and you think Never Tell Patty might be able to sit that kind of stalking trip and then go. I just don't think she's quite good enough yet, but maybe there's another step forward there. Certainly, we saw a progression in terms of speed figures the first time on the dirt. The horse that's intriguing to me is number 5, Champagne Calling. This is the horse that's 8-1 on the morning line for Ian Wilkes and Julian Leperoux. This horse won very impressively last time out, and that was a $100,000 allowance race. This is a $175,000 stakes race. So yes, she's stepping up in class for sure. She's running the Suncoast, going a mile and 40 against horses like Wonder Wheel and Julia Shining. That was not her best day. That was kind of right after she broke her maiden. But now she went to the bench for a while, comes back at Churchill, runs in that $100,000 allowance optional claimer and gets the win. And you see a big perk up on the buyer speed figure. This is a horse that I think will sit the right trip. I think she'll be sitting 4th in all likelihood. She'll be sitting behind Hoosier Philly, Flamande, and Never Tell Patty. But she's fast enough that she'll be sitting ahead of the 6 as well as Wet Paint. So she should be sitting the very definition of mid-pack 4th. She's got a decent enough late kick that she might just be able to steal this thing or at least come up and hit the board. So even if you like chalk up top, she's a horse at 8-1. I'm absolutely using on my tickets vertically. So really like Champagne Calling at a little bit more of a price. And then finally, the number 6 horse, Sabra Tough. This was one who ran in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. Finished 4th that day. Actually, a pretty nice effort, in all honesty, behind Wonder Wheel and Leave No Trace and Raging Sea. But is a deep closer and is very much so cut from the mold of Wet Paint, but just hasn't really been able to get home the way that Wet Paint does. So this is a horse that just 1 career win, 1 second, 1 third, and 7 career efforts. Did go to the bench for a long time from November until May, came back in the 8 bells, ran a halfway decent buyer speed figure in terms of an 82, but still finished second to last, 4 3/4 lengths back, 6th place out of 7. Now, granted, that was a pretty bunched up field, losing to Red Carpet Ready, Money's Gold, and a Seed. One of the things I'll say is Money's Gold came back, didn't look particularly good in the Acorn, wasn't able to stretch out. A Seed also didn't look particularly good in that Acorn. She was one that I think a few of us actually really liked in that race a little bit. So she didn't look that strong in that race. So that race may not be coming back super strong. With Sabra Tough, presumably the 1 mile is not an issue. She's run halfway decent in a mile and a 16th before, but I still think they are trying to find out exactly what distance is her best distance. She'll have Raylu Gutierrez aboard. Raylu's usually pretty aggressive out of the gate, but with a horse like this, I would imagine, and even the works have not been that sharp in terms of suggesting that she's going to be forwardly placed. So I would imagine she'll be sitting a little bit behind Champagne Calling early and try to make a little run late. But listen, for me, when you take a look at this field, it's going to be Wet Paint and Hoosier Philly. Maybe it's a little bit of a coin toss. I'll probably actually lean towards Hoosier Philly here just because the way that Ellis Park has been playing, I'm going to use her up top. You might get a little bit more of a price. I think Wet Paint's going to get bet down a little bit more, but certainly it's hard to see either both of them not hitting the board and not being in the exacta. The other horse that I would use from this group is Champagne Calling at 8-1. I think that's how you enrich your trifectas and your vertical wagers. But from a horizontal standpoint, I think this is one where you kind of stake out a strong opinion on either Wet Paint or Hoosier Philly and probably single and move on. Maybe you use the two favorites. I don't like doing that, though, horizontally, using two horses at such a short price. I'm going to use one or I'm going to use none. I don't like using both. And in this case, I'll probably end up just using Hoosier Philly and moving on. All right. Well, that's going to do it for the Monomoy Girl Stakes preview. I hope you enjoyed tuning into this here on Trust the Profits. Remember to make sure to follow me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace. Make sure to subscribe to all the great content that we have here at Trust the Profits. Make sure to like this video and let me know who you think is going to win this year's Monomoy Stakes. All right. Monomoy Girl Stakes. How dare I leave her name out? So with that being said, I hope everybody has a wonderful and safe weekend, great and profitable day at the races. And until next time, friends, my name is Matthew DeSantis, saying that it's now post time.